Savvy Business Radio, home to over 500,000 listeners per month, and runs in syndication on 8 AM/FM stations nationwide, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out in a bigger way, call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.
Our guests today include James Miller, entrepreneur and coach, shares how to overcome mediocrity, and ghostwriter Dr. Angela E. Lauria discusses how becoming a published author can help your business grow. Find out more about James and his podcast and business Lifeology at jamesmillerlifeology.com. Find out more about Angela and how you can get your book published today. Go to theauthorincubator.com. Hi, James. How are you today?
I am so well. Thank you so much for having me, Christina. I really appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have you. We chatted a couple months prior. We had to, go back and forth a bit with some life challenges happening in my life.
Yes.
Thank you for holding on and being patient. But I was really impressed. You're a licensed psychotherapist and composer, which really drew for me because I studied psychotherapy in college. I was thinking of being a psychologist.
Oh, really? Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, and I also studied violin in the School of Performing Arts, so that intrigued me when you said composer.
Oh, wow. Apparently we have a lot in common. I did not realize that.
Yeah, and then you're an awesome podcaster. I've heard your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
You're welcome. But you've done so much amazing work in the world. I want you to share with our audience a little bit about your backstory and what led to the work you're now doing.
Oh, perfect. Well, I had a very successful practice in the Washington, D.C. area for the past 10 years. And, on a personal level, I just wasn't being fulfilled. I was doing a lot in my professional life, but in my creative side, being a composer, I just wasn't being fulfilled. And I recognized there's just some mediocrity in my life. And that's definitely one thing, if we can, I'd like to talk with, perhaps that would be one of the topics we talk about today. But as I formulated this plan for myself, I thought, okay, well, what am I lacking in my life? And I created a way to kind of measure that. And then I created a plan in the sense of, well, my goal is to be location independent. I want to do whatever I'm doing anywhere I want to do it in the world, which is pretty ambitious. I'm like, well, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm kind of limited to an office. And so I formulated this plan, and I came down to the West Palm Beach, Florida area because I really wanted to focus on my music. I wanted to do something different. And so that's when I created James Miller Lifeology. And Lifeology is essentially the study of life. We all have a lesson to teach. It doesn't matter who you are, you always have a lesson to teach someone, from I want to be successful like that person, or the mistakes this person made, I do not want to go down that route. So there's always a lesson. And in that's when I stepped away from the psychotherapy component, the individual or couples counseling medium. And then I switched to the podcast. I write for a magazine down here. I have a YouTube channel. And then I just finished my second album, which I'm so excited about. So that's now available on all digital music stores. It's called Restoration. So the way I compose for my first album and my second album, they're written like a book. Each composition is written like a chapter in a book. And so the first one is called Consolation, and it goes through the grief and loss that someone experiences from the devastation. And each, like I said, composition is kind of an emotional construct of what someone experiences, and it moves them all the way through that healing process. And then Restoration, my version of Restoration, is a person is restored greater than what they were before. And that's why that piece itself is pretty dramatic. But it's a wonderful, wonderful album. I'm incredibly honored and blessed that I was able to do this. And, I just think in life, when we do what we're supposed to do, as we all know, life really works in the way it's supposed to. If we isolate an event and think, oh, this event doesn't make sense, like look at a jigsaw puzzle. When you look at one of those jigsaw puzzle pieces, sometimes when we isolate a negative event, we're like, well, what doesn't make sense? But when you step back and look at the picture, it literally all works together in a beautiful tapestry, which is our life.
And what you said earlier about the mission of Lifeology is perfect. No, it is, because what I loved about what's come about for Savvy is that all the business owners, see, when I got started, Savvy was really just a marketing tool for my initial consulting business. But what I found is I don't know everything, and neither does everyone else. But I thought, hey, how cool is it to come together as a community, share our wisdom that each of us have learned in our perspective, things that we're really good at, and share it with each other. And
exactly.
And you're so right. We all have our individual talents and gifts that can enhance others' lives by sharing it amongst each other. Now, you said something very interesting there about mediocrity stuff. And I find that interesting because for years I lived a life where you're just getting by. You feel like you have to do whatever job, job, you're doing because I need to pay the rent, I need to eat, all that good stuff. But you're not really living a life of fulfillment and joy. What exactly is mediocrity? How does it come about in someone's life? And is your passion and purpose pursuit kind of a help to get rid of mediocrity?
Well, one of the biggest things when I with my clients is I just have them ask a question. If or reflect on something, if they ever say, "There's got to be more to life than this," or "There's got to be more than just going out to the bars with my friends," or "There's got to be more than sitting here in front of my computer at home," or "There's got to be more than watching my DVR shows." Anytime you ask that question, that is a form of mediocrity. Now, mediocrity, there's kind of a spectrum of that. Mediocrity can just be you're feeling mediocre, which is average for that, like a 5-minute duration, or the mediocrity component on the other side of the spectrum can be for your full life and your full mission and passion in life. And so anytime we ask ourselves, or just feeling sometimes even bored, because boredom is just essentially an unfocused energy we have, and we think that we have nothing to do, but we do. So when we can really recognize that question, there's got to be more, then that is your aha moment to say, wait a minute, clearly I'm not growing and developing in my life. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with watching TV or going out with your friends. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is when you finally get to the place of, I'm kind of over this. I've done this, I've mastered this, and I'm just kind of over it. That is a time for you to say, all right, now I need to make a plan. One of the things I actually did for myself when I created the plan to move down here to Florida, but what I also teach my clients as well, is I'm all about numbers and scales. So when you can create a graph, and so on the horizontal line, you have all these different subject matters in your life. It can be from your health, that can be broken down into exercise, diet. It can be your finances. It can be your relationships from your significant other to your friendships, breaking up your categories of your life as many as you can. And then on the vertical line, you have a scale of 1 to 10. And 10 is the most fulfilled you feel, and 1 is the least fulfilled that you feel. And so when you can take some time to really reflect on, let's say, your health and wellness, let's say your exercise, and you can say, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled am I feeling? And then you create the time frame of, the past 6 months or the past 3 months, whatever that might be. And when you can be really aware of what those numbers are, it creates a beautiful graph, a subjective graph, but a graph nonetheless to say, wait a minute, I'm not really being fulfilled in half of the things in my life. And then that allows that person to then say, well, all right, now I want to be proactive in my life. So what do I want to do differently? And that can be from a huge life change, kind of like what I did, or that could just be, I want to bolster this number when it comes to my my friendships. And then what would that look like? And I think often we have this ideal version of what we want our life to be like, but we don't really think it through. Well, what's the likelihood that we're going to become this ideal person? That ideal person is the end result. And frankly, we're never going to get to that ideal person because there's always life that happens. And when life happens, it can distract us. There's a difference between that ideal self versus a realistic self. And the realistic self is who I am today. Now, I want to strive to be that ideal self. But today, with all the struggles that I'm dealing with, how do I just do the best I can to move me in that direction? So that gives us kind of the end result in the direction we want to go with that. And so when we're really kind of aware of the different areas in our life where that mediocrity is present, then that affords us the ability to say, now I have a choice. Now it's in front of me. Now I have to make a decision to say, all right, I understand I'm living in mediocrity. Now do I change it or do I not? And if I don't change it, well, then that's kind of back on me because my life is not going to be fulfilled.
I like that you did the visual representation. I think it was back, maybe 2001? No, maybe 2002. I had started to say in my present job that I don't want to do this type of work for the rest of my life. I was like, is this it? Am I just going to do this
exactly
one day? Yeah. And so that was the question I was asking. And it was interesting. I started picking up self-help books at that point and started reading them, frequently, but I wasn't really applying anything. And as you said, then it goes just back on you. It got to a point where I got, my health got severely, took a downturn that then I said, okay, now I need to make change. Why do you think sometimes that we wait until we get very, very uncomfortable before we decide to reach past mediocrity?
Well, anytime we have to make a change, there's many components of it, because if we don't have a baseline of making a change before, then all it's going to be is just our fears that happen. It's going to be our fears that kind of stop us from making any changes, because when we don't have a baseline of way to kind of fall back on and say, well, I've done this before, so I know what's going to happen. Many times that's it, because mediocrity itself, it's, as we know, it just means average. And so to do anything outside of the average scope really is going to take effort. And a lot of us are just very comfortable in our current life, even though we're not fulfilled, but we're like, this is all it is. And then to make a significant change, specifically if your peers around you maybe are engaged in their own world, whatever that may be like, but to be the outlier, many people struggle with that because it's not comfortable. And mediocrity is very comfortable. It's a dysfunctional comfort that we live in, but we're never going to grow beyond it. And that's one of the reasons why we don't change, is because we don't have that baseline, nor do we often have the energy to do something greater.
That's a good point, the energy. And I think, and here's something very interesting. When my health started to take a downturn, I really was at the point where I could barely function to go to work, do the work, and come home and go to sleep. I mean, I was that fatigued. So at that point, doing anything extra beyond to try to move myself forward was not really possible until I first hit the first thing, which was get myself back into some level of health so that I could have the energy to start moving past just average.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also goes back to structure. When we are living a life that is mediocre or whatever, and maybe in an event that's mediocre, there really isn't structure. It's kind of like our mind it's a free flow, does whatever in a vegetative state, and there's no structure around that. So in order to have a change, you have to have a plan, and a plan creates structure. You have your objectives, which is saying, this is what I'm going to do for like the first steps, and this is the proof that I've done it. And in order to make that change, it all, as we know, has to start in your mind. What I tell people, if they're just struggling to make a change, is even at home, our perspective the perspective we have in life is going to determine our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So what I tell people at home is, if you're coming up with a plan or you're doing something, then slightly change up your house. In other words, sit in a different spot. If you always come home and you sit in the same spot in your house, read your mail or watch TV, literally sit in a different area of your house or a different place in that room, and be aware of how different that feels. Now, some people are like, James, that's really not a big deal. But the point is when you slightly sit in a different area of your house even, it makes you look at the world differently. And that's when you can start to create a plan, is just simply changing your environment up a bit. Changing your environment a little bit starts to make your mind tilt, because if we're so caught up in our mediocre schedules, well, in order to make a change, you have to slightly change it somehow. So to simply change your environment in some way is going to afford you the ability to have a slightly different mindset to create some of these new plans.
Wow. I like that you just mentioned that. I had a deep, deep feeling recently to really updo my entire house. And it wasn't just, no, seriously. It wasn't really just a spring cleaning. I did throw out a lot of stuff. But really, it was more deeper than that. It was really to really, because I've been doing the Savvy now and my other consulting business for 4 years, and I feel like I'm kind of like at a place where I want to take it to the next level. But I had no idea where to move, how to move, but something inside of me said, you know what, I'm going to change my entire environment here, make it look different, but not really buy too much different other than curtains. Really just to get a different perspective. And I wasn't thinking, and it's interesting you say that, because I wasn't even thinking logically that this is why I'm doing it, but it just felt like this is something that needs to be done now so I can work on the rest of my life. So I like that you bring that up. It's very interesting.
Well, that's amazing that you did that, because I think subconsciously when people have a very strong personality and have drive, we automatically do these things, and I'm just kind of putting a term to it or maybe shedding light on it, but I think a lot of us who have that drive, and people who maybe want some of that drive, do things slightly different, but we're not aware that that's really part of the process. And when we are aware that it's part of the process, then we can give ourselves kind of kudos to be like, aha, I may have, I sat in a different spot in my house, but that's a start, and that's a wonderful start. I often also tell people, just to kind of a little piggyback off of what you just said, I often tell people in their house that their house is reflective of kind of the emotional struggle or things that are happening in their life. We all have a certain baseline of what our cleanliness is, or tidiness rather, not cleanliness, but tidiness. Some of us may come home and I know for me sometimes I come home and I may see dishes in the dishwasher or in the sink, and I have some laundry I have to fold. And for me, what I tell people is, whatever your natural baseline is for the tidiness of your home is going to determine how you're doing. It's a barometer. And if all of a sudden your house is in, you come home and you're like, oh my God, looks like I got robbed. Well, that's a really good indication that you're probably not doing too well internally, because our when we're focused, that allows us to maintain the status quo of what our cleanliness is. But if we're internal and we're struggling with something, we're not going to do those chores around us. And so that's what I always tell people, to work backwards. If we're struggling with our emotions and trying to change our life, you change your environment. Your environment, conversely, will allow you to then declutter your mind and declutter your emotions. So for you to go ahead and do what you did, you changed it up completely, which put all that order back inside of you, which gave you the fortitude and the strength and the direction to change your life.
Wow, that is fascinating, James, because the first thing my boyfriend said is, you got rid of everything. No, I didn't get rid of everything.
Sure.
But some of my neighbors actually thought I were moving, because it's amazing. I have a studio, but I know how to hide stuff very, very well under my bed.
Yeah.
So you would not believe the amount of stuff that can come out of all this hidden places.
Sure.
But I'm like, I made a rule that anything that hasn't been used in a year is hitting the road. It's out of here.
Yes.
I had a big sale downstairs. Well, actually, I didn't have a sale. I just gave it away to neighbors. But it was really because a decluttering of, I felt much lighter inside. So I see exactly what you're talking about with the decluttering outside to declutter inside, so that more can be ready to come in and make a change. I think I'm setting myself up to be ready to accept the new change and to.
Oh, you totally are. Yes.
Totally.
I'm so excited for you. I can't wait to hear about what happens, what the change is going to look like. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it is. And we had talked earlier also how we often self-sabotage ourselves.
Yes.
And I know I've done that, like I said, 7 years ago, or actually now it's about 10 years ago, back in my corporate job, where I sat there going, I can't do this for the rest of my life. There's got to be more. But it took me 7 more years to make that step. Yeah. Why is it so often that we self-sabotage? We get a great idea. We maybe start going to the gym to get back in shape, and then we get off of the wagon almost immediately. Why does that happen?
You know, I coined something I call the 3-second rule, which is essentially self-sabotage happens in 3 seconds. I know for me, what I find where it typically happens is New Year's resolutions. 3 seconds, boom, we're out. We're done. So we're done with. But so the 3-second rule is essentially, if I want to make a change, if I am not proactive and being really aware of what this change is going to be, for example, I want to get up, a really ambitious goal of getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning to go to the gym. Well, when 5 a.m. comes along, my alarm goes off. If I'm not dedicated to getting up, literally within 3 seconds, I hit the snooze button and I roll over and go back to sleep. And I'm like, oh, I'll do it later. I'll go to the gym later. So then I'm at work for lunch. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym now. And then if I think about it, I'm like, I kind of come up with a logical reasoning. Then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well, I'll go after work. And then after work, your friends are like, well, let's go to happy hour. Well, I'll go later. So the point is, the 3-second rule is anytime we're going to make a change, our previous negative behavior, that negative pattern, will all of a sudden rise up and say, wait a minute, that's too much work. Or we don't have time for this, or we really can't fit in a workout today because we have some random thing that we'll come up with. But the point is the unhealthy behavior will always speak louder than the new healthier pattern, because the new healthier pattern hasn't even been incorporated into our life. And so that's why we have to always be careful. It really is 3 seconds. For example, I love chocolate, okay? And so if I'm going to the grocery store, and if I go by that, if I know that I'm coming by that aisle, I literally have to say, all right, James, you're going to set yourself up here. And then if I'm walking by it, and if I look at that candy, I will literally say, that's a 3-second rule. You have 3 seconds to make up your mind. And sometimes I'm like, forget it. I haven't had, candy in a while. And I talk myself into getting the candy. Or that I can literally say, no, I'm not going to do that. So before I even get to that aisle, I may even just take a different route because I don't want to be tempted with it. So the point is mediocrity starts within 3 seconds. Anytime we want to make a change, we have to have the strength and fortitude to say, this is going to be difficult, but I have 3 seconds to implement a new behavior. And if I mess up, well, then what's my plan to make sure that I do it anyway? Did you realize most people think that I think the old, I don't want to say parable, but the old rule was that it was, I think, 21 times for a habit. It's actually 64 times. And so, I know, right? So that's why, for one reason why New Year's resolutions really don't work, because people within the first 3 weeks, they peter out because they've only done it for 21 times if they went every day. So that's why 64 times has to happen. So when you want to make a new change in your life, with that 3 seconds, you have to really be mindful of that, make that change, build it into your schedule, 64 times, and that is where that habit really starts.
This is fascinating for me, James. I had heard a lecture teacher say a while back when I was listening to the Habits and Change. He had said that really it starts with first the desire, like you said, the dedication, desire that this is what I want. But then next is the desire, and then I'm going to commit to it. There's no back road. There's no going the opposite direction. Failure is not an option type of thing. So it's got to be first I totally have desire, I'm totally in, then I'm totally dedicated to going that route. It's forward, no backwards.
Yes.
And then the third route, he said, to continually study, be a student, disciplined. But really that requires you to constantly just, I guess, be aware and pay attention. What am I feeling saying right now? Because say you want to give up chocolate, you go out with friends to a pastry shop and you're like, I'm not going to be tempted. On the way to the pastry shop, I'm so not going to be tempted. But then all your friends are sitting, your girlfriend, they're like, oh, the chocolate cake, it's just so awesome.
Exactly. And then it's over. It's over.
Oh, yes, here, you want to try a little piece of my cake? It's like, just give me my own piece.
But, I want to add on to what he was saying as well. And I think this is where one of the struggles are that people experience is anytime you want to make a change, well, you've never done it, or the person hasn't done it before. So you have no, like I said before, no background in that. But what we often find is the reason why we can't make a change is because we haven't built it into our schedule. So let's say you want to go to the gym, let's say for a half hour. Well, if you haven't gone to the gym before for a half hour, when are you going to fit it into your schedule? So we often over commit to something. We want build it in our schedule, which we don't realize that's a part of it. And then we want to actually do the behavior. So then if I'm doing two of those things, well, that's too much to do at once. So the first part in anything after you have the mindset and the fortitude is you have to figure out, well, when am I going to do this? I literally have to look at my schedule and say, all right, so if I want to go to the gym, I'm just using that as an example, I have 30 minutes. Now, when is the best time of the day to do that with traffic, or do I just do that at home? Because before you can even get to the gym, you have to know when it's going to happen, when it's going to be in your day. Because if people don't figure that first part out first, that is why they're going to fail, because they're thinking, oh, I have this meeting, or I have this, I have that. And we already have, our day's already full before we even get to the gym. So we're going to try and fit it in, and then we're rushed and we don't enjoy it. And then all of a sudden, the things that were already in the schedule are going to take over. So that's what I really like to have people do. If they do a year plan, break it down into quarters. The first quarter is all about just building the schedule, really, and then figuring out how it works. And then the next quarters beyond that is the implementation of the new behavior. So it's always about planning, and the more planning we have, the more successful we're going to be, because we've figured out all the loopholes. Because logically, if we don't want to do something, we're going to figure out a way not to do it and somehow justify it so that we don't feel guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. And just recall for me, James, I think about maybe 10 years. Wow. I had started on a exercise regimen, which at first, because I had pain, and this was the big factor that pushed me forward to make the decision to say yes and stick to it, was pain. And that often is a really good motivator. It's like, I don't like this back pain anymore. I would like it to stop.
Yeah.
So that kept me on.
That's a positive reinforcement. Exactly.
Right. Let's see. I don't like this. And really, after 3 weeks of doing it, the pain had stopped. I was like, I like this no pain bit. It's really awesome.
Well, it's the short term versus the long term. The short term is we can make a decision to not do it, to make the positive changes. So the short term is I'm feeling mediocre, I don't have to make any changes, versus the long term of the long-term reward of how I'm going to feel afterwards, if on the diet and exercise, of making this life change in my life, whatever that might be. So we really have to ask ourselves, am I going to go with the short term of I don't have to put any effort in, or the long term of this is going to be the new person I am, and that's what I want? And that's really where the buy-in is. So we always have an opportunity to say, short term, long term, which one am I going to do? And when we have that awareness, and that's really what I teach with everybody in general, is the more awareness we have, then we have to take responsibility. Because often we can be very reactive and be like, oh, you made me so mad, or you're making me yell at you. Well, the truth of the matter is we always have a choice. And when we can really stop and be reflective of that choice, then the onus is back on us to be like, okay, well, now I need to know, is it short term, long term? And that's what's always going to help us, because it helps us then buy into, if I just a little bit longer hold out, I will eventually get to that long term.
And it empowers you. It really puts the power back into your lap without you feeling like Yeah, yeah. Because what I noticed for me, and this is interesting, because I'm listening to what you said about planning and how we can talk ourselves out of anything and rationalize ourselves. When I was 10 years back in pain with my back, I started this exercise regimen. I lived in a basement apartment. So what was awesome about it is because I lived in the basement and off to the side where there was a hallway above me for the people who lived above me, so that I could exercise even late at night. No one would hear me. I got into a schedule. I would do it. Sometimes I get home really late from work and do the exercise regimen in my home at 11 p.m. And that worked really, really well.
Perfect.
Now I'm in a studio where I lived in the middle of the building, and I have a dog that kind of wants to, jump around with me. So, and I see what you're talking about, because when I tried to add it back at home, I would be interrupted. Neighbors would be like, "What's going on?" So then, you're like, "Oh, this is too hard. It's getting in the midst of everyone." But really, what you're saying here is when you start making a plan about, okay, this isn't working this way. How do I course correct and make it work in another way so that I can do what I have to do and accomplish my goal?
Exactly, because if a person doesn't course correct that way, then all of a sudden they're going to be like, "Well, this just doesn't work." I tried it and it failed. And I'm sure all of us have said that before. I've tried it before, it doesn't fail. Well, it often doesn't fail is because that planning part isn't there, and we haven't necessarily stuck with it enough to really see how to tweak it so that it does work. There's no reason why it wouldn't work. It just is simply we haven't figured out all the components of that. And like I said before, we often have the goal of wanting to be this ideal person, going back to diet and exercise. We want to look like this certain person, and our desire to get that quick fix stops us from saying, well, first off, that's not healthy. But the other part is I don't even know how I'm going to get there. So if I go to the gym 100 times, boom, that's how I'm going to look. Well, first off, going back, if it's not in your schedule, there's no way you're going to do it. So to break up, and that's why I usually have people do like a year-long goal. Is the first quarter, you set really small objectives, and obviously that's going to be the scheduling part. But then you say, and I keep saying the gym, but if you're at the gym and say, well, I want to go to the gym 3 times. Well, boom, there's 3 times a week. Well, right there, I have my list. I did it. That's manageable. So you create all those steps to then get your first quarter goal, whatever that is. And then you increase it a little bit more for the second quarter, and then you keep increasing it until, boom, you've achieved your goal. But often we have this, we're trying to be at the last quarter when we first start with all those objectives, and there's no way we can do it because we've never done it before.
And what I'm liking that you're mentioning here is it's systematic in that you look at it, okay, I put down a goal of 3 times a week, and say you start doing 3 times a week, but it's really not working. You're not keeping with the schedule. Well, then you reassess it. Okay, why is it not working? What can I do? Let's put it back to 2 times a week, or maybe 3 times a week, but 15 minutes instead of 30 minutes. Maybe 15-minute walks in the park. But that way, now you're attaining it, you're keeping the goal, and now you can add on.
Exactly, because what I always tell people is this is to help you succeed. Why would you set it up where you're going to fail? I mean, if I have all these goals and objectives for my life and I say, well, I want it now, well, I've just set myself up to fail because I've never done this before. So mediocrity itself is really a distraction. So the mediocrity part when we're like, I don't want to be this way anymore, that's when we overshoot our goal. And then the overshooting of that then causes us to be like, well, I tried it and didn't work, and then so this must be all there is, and then I'm going to go on with my life. And that's another reason why people don't really go reach their goals, is because they get comfortable in that because they tried once and they failed. One last thing I want to say is what I often have people do is because it's so important for us to be able to check in. I have people separate between what their emotions are and what their body feels like. If I wake up and I have a cold, well, often we think, oh, I have to sit in bed, or this is a miserable day. But the point is my body doesn't affect my emotions. And vice versa. If someone says something to me and it hurts my feelings, well, that doesn't mean that I'm going to lay in bed all day. My body's totally fine. I could still get up and do all the errands I have to do. So what I do is I have them randomly set an alarm on their phone. And when this alarm goes off, the goal is to say, all right, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10's the best I feel, 1's the worst I feel. Well, on that scale, what are my emotions? And then what are my body? What is my body feeling? Because when you can separate between the two, you realize what you can change, because our emotions, if we're feeling a certain way, often tell us, oh, I just have to lay in bed all day, or I don't have the energy to do something. And that's not true. It's just simply what your emotions are, but your body's fine. And vice versa, if your body's under the weather, you can still be in a great mood, laugh and joke, whatever you might want to do, but they're not one and the same. And when we create that internal awareness, then after a while, we've trained ourselves not to even have to use the alarm. We can immediately do that in every situation we're in. For example, if I'm talking to you, I may not be feeling well, but I can still have this conversation. I can still enjoy that So when we build this into our day all the time, and that internal awareness, we can separate between the things and say, I can live a much more productive life today. And it helps us then, once again, understand that short-term versus long-term payoff. And that's why one of those check-ins are just so easy, but they're so helpful in a wonderful way.
Wow. I love that you went here about incorporating what are you feeling in your body and what is your emotions feeling? Because because as I told you recently in the beginning of our conversation, I did an overhaul in my home here to help with an overhaul inside. But I also noticed I was getting really deep headaches every Saturday before. And I love doing my interviews. Every Saturday I do a bunch of interviews and I love them. But I thought, well, this is odd. Why am I getting a headache on my favorite day of the week where I get to interview people? And what I did a course correction where I said, what's going on here? Let me check in with myself. My body is saying headache. What is my emotion saying? And I was feeling overwhelmed. What I did is I took on a whole bunch of new clients and put them all spaced pretty close together, thinking I can handle it. And then realizing that I wasn't feeling like I was serving everyone to the best of my ability. So I actually cut back on my schedule on purpose so that I could serve people better. And now the headaches have gone away. But, it's interesting because it's just what you're talking about is checking in. All right, here's my body telling me I have a really bad headache. Now, what is my emotions telling me about this situation so that you get a clearer picture? Fabulous.
And it always works. It works so well. But the point is we're often on autopilot, and that's where the mediocrity comes in. We're on autopilot that we don't even realize that there's so much happening inside of us. There's so much data that our body, that our emotions are giving us to make that change. But when don't have that awareness and we're more externally focused on everything around us and social media, whatever those things may be, we don't stop and reflect to say, what clues are in my life internally that's saying, James, you can make this change. We are not happy. Change. And so, I'm guilty of this too. So, even though I teach this, but I'm human like everybody else. But the point is that when we can really, really build it into our day, we're unstoppable because we can trust ourselves. We can trust when our emotions are telling us that something in this environment is wrong or not healthy for me. And that's when I can create boundaries that keep me safe, or if my body's acting a certain way, that, just even a little bit of agitation, it can be a way to say, this environment is not healthy for my subconscious, my fight or flight is kicking in, and there's something happening here that is not okay for me. So as soon as I feel that, and because I practice with these check-ins, I can find that stillness within myself to say, my body's reacting away, or all of a sudden this spike in my emotion, what is that about? And I'm able to then remove myself from that situation, or I note it and say, okay, well, that's something to explore later. But I have that information. But I wouldn't have that information if I hadn't trained myself just to simply check in with myself.
Yes, and I have a big problem with that. I don't like to sit in complete silence. Yeah. And I find the mind and the subconscious will often find ways to. It likes to stay status quo.
It certainly does, yeah.
But I loved our call today. It's been so
thank you. Yes, awesome. I loved it too.
And James, I don't want us to leave though without people finding out how they can find out more about you, work with you, your awesome podcast. Share that with them.
Wonderful. So if they want to find me online, they can find me at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and they can hear my podcast. It's on it's on all podcast portals. They can hear my YouTube channel, which is James Miller Lifeology. They can read my articles there. They can take courses that I created in my academy, and they can even buy my latest album, Restoration. So all that there is there at jamesmillerlifeology.com.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again, Jane, for sharing your valuable wisdom with our savvy listener today. It's been so awesome having you.
Thank you so much for having me be on your show today.
Now, here's our interview with Dr. Angela E. Loria, Ghostwriter. Hi, Angela. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
I am fantastic. Super excited to be talking to you today.
I'm super excited to have you. As we talked about before the interview, my life has been topsy-turvy, and we had to reschedule a couple of times. So I want to thank you for, staying the guard and coming on back to talk with us, because you do very interesting work that I know our audience is going to find fascinating. You are the author incubator. You help coaches and other people out there who want to get their book published and don't know quite how to do that. So before we go on to talk about all that you do, share how you got into doing this.
Well, it's kind of a funny story. When I was in college, I was a journalism major, and I got a recommendation from a professor to go work for this New York Times bestselling author. And that was my very first job. And over the next 17 years, I tried to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And in the meantime, I did hundreds of best-selling books. I worked as a ghostwriter. I worked as an editor, a proofreader, a fact checker, like you name it. I did the job in the book world. And things would happen, like I'd go on vacation to London and I'd sit next to someone on the metro and they would hire me to do their book. Or like at one point I was in Ayers Rock in the middle of Australia, Uluru, walking around Uluru, and we ran into this couple, and the guy in the couple hired me to do his book. Like I would date someone, I'd go on 2 dates with the guy and I would be doing their book. And of course I thought none of this counted because I hadn't figured out what I was going to do when I grew up. But I was super busy. I was making money. I was doing all these books and marketing for the books, and like it was amazing and I loved it, but it clearly wasn't my job because I didn't have a website. Like I didn't do any marketing. Like clearly this wasn't my job. So I went and got a PhD in philosophy so I could be a philosophy professor. And then I got a job as a philosophy professor and I was terrible.
Oh, no.
It was awful. I got fired. I got terrible reviews on Rate My Professor. You can go look them up. Like it was awful. Like I was a horrible professor. And so then I was trying to figure out what to do. And in the meantime, I did a bunch more books. And none of this ever occurred to me that like maybe this was my life's calling. So I started reading this book called Finding Your Own North Star by Martha Beck. And I've always been like a personal growth, self-help junkie. I love nonfiction books. And so she had this question in there, what do you lose track of time doing? And I wrote down, actually in the book, I wrote down reading self-help books. And I was like, oh, like that's a job. Like really like that's a thing. I also had on that list talking to my best friend Jenny and playing cards. And I was like, well, those aren't jobs. Like clearly I'm doomed to be a failure in life. And then I went to this book writing workshop, and it was there were 24 people. It was way back in October of 2010. And the 23 other attendees all hired me individually to work on their books. Which, by the way, like,
I think it's funny that the universe keeps sending you people and you're just like, what is it again I'm supposed to do?
Like, I have to figure it out. No, literally, I was, at the time this happened, I was applying for law school programs because I thought I should be a personal injury attorney. Like, that was my plan. And I had to like pull out of these law school programs because I had so much business with all these authors.
Wow.
And then that's how it happened. That became the author incubator. So like my magic is particularly people who have been trying to write a book for 5, 10, 15, 30 years. We get their books done sometimes in as little as 3 days.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing. Like I can get, so as a ghostwriter, what I learned is that it takes 15 to 24 hours to write a book. And I had to figure that out because I had to know how to price my contracts. And so I got very good at writing good books quickly. And what I learned is it's actually easier to write a book quickly because you're changing so much. When people say they've been writing a book for 3 years, what they actually mean is they've been writing 6 different books. They've started and finished books because they've changed so much in those 3 years that they write a chapter, a month goes by, they don't believe any of that anymore. So then they start a new book, they write another chapter, and they can never quite land their book. So my like magic is landing the plane with a round of applause.
Whoa, that is so cool, girl. And I know people out here listening into our conversation today will totally be able to relate because like you, myself, I was sitting in a corporate job, and when I hired my mentor, she said, so what do you love to do was her question, like what was in Martha Beck's book.
What do you lose track of time doing?
Yeah, but she said a little bit different, like what would you do and not even get paid for? Like what do you love to do that you love? And I'm like, I don't know. I like walking my dog. I like talking to my friends. I like, flying with my partner who's a pilot. But none of it I could see turning into a career. And then when I started, now here's the thing that helped me out is I started asking, when you ask your best friend or your close friend or family, they're an outside perspective. And they just kept coming back like, you really connect with people and you pull out great stories for them and blah, blah, blah. But they couldn't identify a vocation or job until I started doing podcasting. And then they were like, that's it. But yeah, so it's very interesting. And I love the way the universe keeps sending you people like, here, do my book. And you're like, what is it I'm supposed to do? And it's like right there. Yeah. And
right?
Yeah, it's got to be when you're ready. When you're ready to hear it.
I was at the Glastonbury Music Festival in the UK. Mm-hmm. And I met this guy who happened to be the chief marketing officer of Clark's Shoes. And I'm just talking to the guy, listening to music, and he's like, oh, we want to write a book about how Clark's is perceived in different countries. Mm. And we're looking for somebody to travel the world and interview people walking out of Clark's shoe stores. And so I ended up getting this contract. I went to Ireland, England, Australia, New Zealand, and around the U.S.
So cool.
And I interviewed people, and it's very different. Like, so in the U.S., people would talk about men's shoes. In Australia, everybody says school shoes. So I got this like free trip around the world. But at the time it happened, this is going to make no sense, but it was the beginning of the internet. So this was like 1994. Mm-hmm. And the internet service provider that I happened to pick was a company called Clark.net. I don't know why. And then my boyfriend at the time made the account for me. Mm-hmm. And I was really into Doc Martens. I used to always wear Doc Martens. Mm-hmm. And so he made the account, and it was before that we knew everybody's username was going to be like first initial, last name.
Yeah.
And so people used to pick like funny handles, like for a CB radio. Uh-huh. Like they would pick like a funny handle. And so at first he made the handle Velveeta for me, but somebody else had that. So then he changed it to footwear. So when I met this guy from Clark's Shoes, my email address was footwear@clark.net.
Oh my God.
And the guy gives me a free trip around the world. Like, could the universe have like they might as well have like sent like a group of thugs to beat me up and be like, this is your mission on the planet. And then it took me another like, I don't know, 15 years to figure it out. Like, what?
Yeah.
So,
well, that's tremendous. That is so cool. And then you're sitting here like, yeah, that is really cool. But when you were going about, what is it that was the aha where you realized, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do? Was there like a day or a moment, or did it just lead bit by bit? How did it come about for you?
Yeah, so I went to this, so it just so happens that book writing conference I went to was run by Martha Beck. It was called the Dream Writers Retreat. She's only done it once. Mm-hmm. And it was her and her editor. And I had a book idea. I've hosted a lot of exchange students. And so I had a book idea about exchange students that I went to this conference with. And at the end of the conference, I mentioned that all 23 other attendees hired me, but so did Martha Beck.
No.
And so did the other co-presenter was a woman named Susan Hyatt. And she hired me. And it was actually the very first book we published was her book. So the people who ran the book event and all the attendees hired me. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, maybe this is a sign.
Wow, Angela, that is amazing. So when that happened, did you try to go in the room and sell, or did it just kind of flow? How did it work out that people were like, I want you? Like, did you just tell your story and they hear how you got people's book done and they're like, I want you to do that for me? How did they, because I think this is what I noticed, Angela. I will go to maybe a book conference or a coach's conference and people will be selling so hard. They'll be throwing their business cards in my face and say, here's my product. I'm awesome. Please buy me. And it feels uncomfortable, both for the person doing it and for me, because I don't even know if I need your service. So
right.
Did it work out for you? Were you trying to sell?
Hell no, girl. Absolutely not. So I had a full-time job and I was working for a software company doing books for them on exciting topics like Windows Server Backup 2.0. So I can get you a copy of that one if you'd like it. And so I was in the conference the presenters were talking about, let's say, how to self-publish or how to pick a topic, like whatever they were talking about. And I would raise my hand and I'd be like, oh, I'm doing a book right now on Windows Server backup. And one of the things we did is we put offers throughout the book to take people to different webinars on our website, because my goal with the book is to generate 1,500 leads a month. Mm-hmm. And so this is how we're going to write the book to get that outcome. And the presenters on the stage were like, what? Hold on, come up here.
Yeah.
So I actually took a chair from the audience and put it on the stage. Mm-hmm. And I explained our social media strategy. I explained how I wrote the books, how it was integrated with our back-end sale. And our back-end sale was a $1,500 piece of software that we sold to network operations managers. So this had nothing to do with coaching, and everyone in the room was a life coach. Wow. And they were like, hold on, if you can get 1,500 email addresses a month for someone to buy Windows Server backup, could you do this for people who might want to lose weight or have a better relationship? And I was like, yeah, it's just the same thing. We got to do this, this, and this. And they're like, okay, let's go.
Wow.
So I didn't even know I was selling something. So I still had this is how stupid I was. I had a full-time job. And as part of that job, we had a conference call line. So I didn't know coaches ever use things like Zoom or Skype or conference call lines. I just had this conference call line for my job. Mm-hmm. And I was like, at the event, I said, hey, everybody, you all seem to want some advice from me. So I will donate my Friday lunch hours. I have a conference call line. Let me write it down on the back of my business card for Aperture Software Discovery. So this is why you don't need a website or a business card to sell your products and make a difference. So I wrote the number for my conference line, which was paid for by my office. I did not know I was starting a business. And then on Fridays, I'd eat my sandwich from the company cafeteria, and I just had an open Q&A call. And they could ask me anything they wanted about the book. And then after the open Q&A call, which I would just tell them anything. I had a full-time job. I was making $180,000 a year. Whoa. Was not looking for anything. I was very busy. I just donated my lunch hour. And then at the end of these Q&A calls, I would get all these emails saying I need your help. Can you help me put this into action? How can I hire you? And I was like, okay, I have some time on Saturday. How about 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Saturday? And they're like, how much do you charge for your services? And I'm like, I don't really have, I don't know. What sounds good to you? Oh. And I'm like, I make $180,000 a year. I don't think you can afford my hourly rate. You want to just make a donation to a charity? So I would charge people $200. I would charge people, we'd pick a charity and we'd make a donation. And by the time I started my business, I had 24 incredible case studies of results that I got for people that was just, as close to from the goodness of my heart as it gets. And it wasn't even, I just love this so much. Yeah. If I could do anything on Saturday morning from 9 a.m. to noon, it would be talking to someone about their book.
Angela, you know what I'm pulling from this? And this is a lot of great points that I can help anyone listening, whether they're a coach or any type of business. And that is that you came from first a place of love and service, that you are really just purely serving from your heart and soul and taking what your greatest gifts and talents were and putting it out there into the world. And you were blessed tenfold or a billionfold for just doing that without even trying to, expect or want anything. And this is something I've come to learn for myself. For us at Savvy, after I've been doing this for about 9 months, I got the same thing you did. People were like, so how do I pay for advertising? Do you do advertising on your shows? I'm like, I'll get back to you. I got to talk to my sales department. We didn't have a sales department, of course. I had no idea what you charge for ads, but I looked it up. What are, radio stations charging, and changed the percentage based on what we had for listeners, called them back and gave them a number, and they said, okay, where do we pay? And that's how it started. But it took me a great long while after that, several more months, for me to say, okay, this is something. But I think what I'm really pulling and liking about your story is it first starts with you just doing what you love and putting it out there fully, completely into the world without question and without trying to figure out how am I going to make a buck off of this? Because I think that's where, as coaches or consultants or whatever, that we get in the way of our great talent and gifts by trying to figure out and make a quote unquote business One, let the universe, or in my case, I call it God, show you the path on how that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
And that's so hard to do when you're coming from that place of like, I need this to work. Like, I really want it to work. Like, the big philosophy in my business under everything is serving from a place where my cup is full. So knowing like at the bottom, and for a long time it was knowing I could always go back to corporate. Like corporations always need books. I know how to get them done. Like I knew I had a valuable skill set, but it's just like, no matter what, whenever I take a client, I just know that I don't need that client to pay my bills. Like my bills are going to get paid. I am going to be taken care of and supported by the universe. I have been for 43 years. I'm going to be for the next 43. Like I've got this, like God, whatever it is like, it's not, I need to make this work. It's like, I want to co-create this with whatever force is out there for the most highest good on the planet.
And that is a really valuable point. But I like that you mentioned that for anyone who might be struggling in their coaching or consulting or whatever business they're doing, to realize there are options. You don't have to struggle at this. Let it unfold as it will, but just put out your heart and serve, and first come from serving and not so much from an idea of how do I just get money from this.
Yeah. It just makes such a difference. I did corporate work until three years into my business before I stopped. Like those companies that I had worked for, I kept consulting with them and doing business books and doing marketing consulting. And I did I worked for a company that did exchange programs and I wrote their website copy. Like I did other things, but like in my head, the story is always like, I am not going to end up in a van by the river. Like this is going to work out.
Yeah.
And so I don't need to try and convince someone to work with me. There's always going to be enough work. And I think when you like change your mindset first and you see that like the chance of you ending up in a van by the river is probably pretty small.
I love the van by the river. Reminds me of the, what do you call it, Saturday Night Live?
The SNL sketch. Yeah, I always think about that because it's like, okay, so you don't get your bills paid this month. What's really going to happen? Like, you are probably not going to be in a van by the river. There's probably something else that's going to kick into place.
God sees the universe like a tapestry where you see all the pretty parts or the picture on the one side, but then the other side, it's all messy and icky because of all the threads, so it looks like a big mess. But that's because that's what we're seeing because we're right on top of it. We can't see the big picture. But the universe can see the big picture, so it's like it makes total sense when you step back. But when you look at it from the back end, it looks like a big string mess of all these, threads and whatever and colors, and it doesn't make a bit of sense until you step back.
Yeah, and by the way, I do think that's why people need coaches. So I just made all of my stuff sound miraculous, but can I just say I had the world's most amazing coach and mentor, and this was not something I just figured out on my own.
Yes. So. Perspective. You're so entwined in your own life and your own story that sometimes just having someone stand outside and sometimes just call you on bull when you're, getting in your own way and just say, boom, stop it up. What's going on here? What's really the core idea or thing stopping you? And for me, it was wanting to please people and I'm not good enough thing that we had to work through. That it still comes up for me today, but the outside perspective of someone who can see through all that can really help you move your business.
Totally, 100%. And I will say, just to tie up with what we do at the Author Incubator, so we work with coaches and consultants, and our premise is exactly this. So the idea, and the best way I can explain it to you is with weight loss. So let's say you had 100 pounds to lose, and you found the world's best weight loss book. Like this is the Bible of weight loss. Everything in here is absolutely perfect. At the end of reading that book, even if you're a slow reader, you have not lost 100 pounds. Right? Like there's no way, no matter like how slow of a reader you are, no matter how good the book is, there's no way that you've lost 100 pounds. Mm-hmm. And so this is true of any book. So whether it's about, or any, I should say, nonfiction, personal growth, business book, whether it's about weight loss or relationships or managing stress or leading a team, whatever that topic is, even the best book in the world with the best editor and written better than any book with the best ideas, you can't implement those ideas while you're reading the book. You are doing something. It's called reading. And so we write our books, and I teach our authors to write books so that they generate leads and clients, not because I care if they get leads or clients, because frankly, I believe their cup is full too. So I think everybody's always sold out. You have exactly the right amount of business for what you should have right now. If that's none, that's exactly what you need right now. You're sold out. But my real reason is like, if we're going to really write books that make a difference, then we have to write books that lead people to work with us and implement the ideas in the book. My Windows Server backup idea, I worked for a company that had a revolutionary technology. After we did that book, the company was bought by Dell for 9 figures, like a very, very big buyout. And the reason why is we solved a problem no one else had solved, which is how to recover your Windows server. Let's say you have 5,000 employees and your server goes down. Usually what happens is you have to send all your employees home because they can't get on email, they can't get on the internet.
Yeah.
So we invented something called live recovery, where you could get your server up while you were bringing it up. Nobody else had done this.
Wow.
And the book was about that. And at the end of the book, the reader knew that it was totally possible. They knew what the savings to the business was. They knew what it was costing them not to do this. But they did not have a live recovery system for their business. So the only thing to do at the end of that book is say, I don't really care about tens of thousands of dollars in lost revenue, or I'm going to invest in a solution to fix this. Let me get on the phone with one of the guys at Aperture. And so that's how I want to write your book, the listener. If you help people build their businesses, if that's what you do, we need to write a book that makes it so obvious that they could try and do this on their own. Like people could finish that book that we wrote and try and build their own live recovery system. Or they could just hire you and you're going to get them that result super fast and super reliably. And now they know the cost of not having that result. Like there's nothing else to do but to call you.
Wow. This is amazing. Well, we can't leave here without letting everyone know how they can contact you ASAP and get their book started today. How can they do that and find out more about you?
So our website is theauthorincubator.com. theauthorincubator.com. And if you go to theauthorincubator.com/apply, there's a little Easter egg there. So if you go to our website, you'll find out all about us. But if you go to the application and share your book idea with me, there's a free 40-minute training at the end of that application. That's a little surprise Easter egg where you'll get to see exactly how we do this with our authors. And you'll get to make a decision if you can do it on your own or if you want some help from somebody who has done this for, I don't know, a couple thousand authors over a couple decades.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'd say the better option would go with a professional that really knows their stuff. And it's true. I think sometimes I hear from people, whatever it is, I don't need a coach. I could do this on my own. I'm like, yeah, I did that for about 7 years before I finally started my business. Or you can get someone who can really help you see things from a different perspective, because when you're in the soup, when you're in it, sometimes you just can't see what's right there. And the same goes for a wonderful, awesome book. You can be reading it over and over again, looks awesome, but someone will just come and be like, this needs a tweak. I can see something you're not seeing right here. So yeah, I thank you so much, Angela. And before we head on out, is there one piece of advice for anyone who's thinking of getting a book out, who hasn't gotten a book out? What would be your one piece of advice to them?
Oh my God, I'm so glad you asked this. Do not start by writing. This is the biggest mistake authors make. They start by writing, they write a chapter, they get another idea, they write another chapter of a different book. They don't know why they're not writing. They beat themselves up. They put it on their New Year's resolution list and they don't know why it's not happening. It's not happening because you don't know why you're writing it. As a ghostwriter, we never didn't finish a book. Because the way you start that process when somebody's going to make a $25,000 investment in a ghostwriter is you figure out why you're doing the project, you scope the project, and you have timelines for the project. Don't start by writing. Start by figuring out why, create the plan, and then you'll know exactly why you're going to make that effort.
Wow. That intrigues me because it's like starting a business without having an idea why you're starting the business and what your plan is to make it happen.
Exactly.
Thank you again, Angela, for coming to Savvy Business Radio.
So fun. Thank you.